Hello, everyone. This is Dorie Clark, and I am here with Susan McPherson. She is the author of the wonderful new book, The Lost Art of Connecting. It actually came out in 2021 in the midst of the pandemic, so we're definitely going to ask her a lot of questions about how one managed to connect during that time, and also especially now as we are, fingers crossed, coming out of it. But it's a pleasure to be here today. Susan McPherson, thank you for joining us.
Dorie, I could not think of a better place to be. So good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for all of you joining us live, please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you and to take your questions for Susan about the lost art of connecting. So Susan, let's start with the obvious. You wrote a book about connecting with people in the thick of a global pandemic. This is probably one of the harder times in human history for people to actually be reaching out and connecting with one another. Let's start with you. How did you stay connected to people during the last couple of years? What did that process look like for you?
Well, very, very challenging. I live alone. I don't have kids. I don't have parents. I don't have a significant other. I do have a wonderful dog, but we speak a different language. So every morning, neurotically so, but it kept me connected. I would text, WhatsApp, phone call, email, shout out my window to 3 to 5 people every day. And there were 3 goals. 1, put a little joy in the world. 2, ask people how they were doing. And 3, just flay my arms up in the air and say, don't forget me. And people would ask me, and they still do, how do you have time? And I always say, I have time to brush my teeth. So that is how I stayed as best as I could connected, and then walking like a fiend just so that I would see people outside my 4 walls.
I love it. That's so important. And I love the element of proactivity in all of this, because I think one of the big challenges that so many people have is that somehow they expect social connections to happen or to come to them, but we really have to put in a lot of effort behind this. And so one of the things that I'm curious about, Susan, is you mentioned in your book that for a long time, you assumed that connecting, that being a connector was kind of a normal thing, that everybody did it because you grew up in a family where this was prioritized. But at a certain point, you realized, oh, this is not how everybody does it. I'd love to hear more about that and what you've discovered as the differences between between yourself, or somebody who's raised with a mentality that, oh, this is normal to be connecting with people all the time, as compared to somebody who maybe just it feels a little alien. What are the key points of difference, and how can you actually get through that barrier?
Well, first and foremost, you have to understand the benefits that will come, right? If we don't understand from a behavior perspective how building connections, making introductions for people that actually is going to come back to help us, then I can't force you to learn. I also always want to distinguish between networking and connecting. Okay, if you look up the definition of networking in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's pretty icky. But if you look up the word connecting, completely different. And I liken connecting to being more feasible and manageable for people, even if they're shy or introverted, because it's one-on-one, maybe one-on-two, over the long haul. And most importantly, leading with how you can be helpful to others versus what can I get? What can this person do for me? Because I fervently believe, and my professional life has been a result of this, is that when you are helpful to others, the help comes back in spades. And just a side note, I founded my company 9 years ago, McPherson Strategies, at the grand young age of 48. 90% of our business over the last 9 years has been inbound. So what that tells me is making time and space for connections in my 20s, in my 30s, in a good part of my 40s, actually has come back and financially rewarded not only myself, but my 15 employees. So I think that the long and short of it is you have to understand why this is valuable, and you have to get out of the fear that it is you walking into the classic, rubber chicken dinner, if those even still exist, and grabbing cards. This is not that.
Such an important point, Susan. We do need to understand what the benefits are, because I think for a lot of people it just seems like a terrible slog, and they don't really understand why. And then, if you're coming into it with the wrong mentality, a lot of times people expect something to magically happen within a week or two of meeting someone. This is a point that you make. Of course, this is not about what happens next week. This is what happens in the next 10 years, 20 years. We don't know. So I think you raised such an important point. We're here with Susan McPherson. She's the author of the new book, The Lost Art of Connecting. And if you're enjoying this conversation, hit the like button, hit the share button so your friends can benefit from it. We want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in and joining us. We're so happy that you're here. We want to say hi to Mirnaz from Louisville. We have our faithful friend Cheryl from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Julie's here from Denver. Vinka's joining us from Burlington. Marina is in Tampa. We have a LinkedIn user from Pittsburgh. Tanya's here from Sacramento. Rosinda from Madrid. Neil is tuning in from Vietnam. Jen from Southern California. Angela from Salt Lake City, and many more. We're so happy all of you are here. Type your questions for Susan McPherson into the chat box. I love it. So many great people.
It's like it's a night show.
Yes, I know. I mean, we're here to have a good time, Susan. That's what it's all about. So, a concept that you talk about in your book is, lots of people, especially during the pandemic, but certainly before as well, were very well versed in FOMO, fear of missing out. You actually propose moving from FOMO to JOMO. Can you talk about what JOMO is and how we can actually make this mental shift?
Absolutely. Well, and again, for people who are shy or introverted, I think this is an important story. First of all, the JOMO I'm talking about is not what you think it is. It is not the joy of missing out. It is the joy of meeting others. And to be a better connector, one of the most important and instrumental ways is to be a convener. Now, that can send the fear of God into someone who may be shy. I, unfortunately or fortunately, am an extrovert. You can probably already tell. But in my next life, I'm going to try being an introvert. Regardless, one of the chapters in my book is all about how to be a better connector, even if you are shy or introverted. But the point here is, when you decide that you find joy in meeting others, you don't have to be the only one inviting. Okay, we live in a world where you can get two other people, and Dorie lives this every day because she's also a super connector. And that is, I could gather 3 people for coffee. We could have such a nice conversation that we could repeat it, and I could ask each of those people to invite one other person. And voila, you're up to 10, although I don't think I'm doing my arithmetic correctly. But the notion is, don't ever feel that if you want to truly find joy in meeting others, that you have to do all the inviting. You can bring others in through the power of the crowd, as small as that crowd can be.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Susan. I love that. And in fact, I just a couple of days ago in Miami had dinner with a guy who's now become a good friend of mine. And I originally met him because I co-hosted a dinner with a friend of his. And we sort of tasked ourselves with, I'd invite half the people and he'd invite half the people. Yeah. And so it can really create great long-term relationships. I love that. We're here with Susan McPherson. She's the author of The Lost Art of Connecting. If you want to learn more about her book, just go to thelostartofconnecting.com. And if you're enjoying this conversation and want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly LinkedIn Better sessions for Newsweek, then please make sure you go to dorieclark.com/LI. That's LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter, and you will get reminders about these sessions. So you can check it out every week. And we have so many great friends tuning in from around the world. We want to say hi to Carlos from Monterrey, Mexico. Rudy is joining us from France. Arun is here from Toronto. Our friend Bernhard from Munich. We have Renee from Costa Rica. Jyoti is joining from India. Shubhadra is here from Guyana. Alan from Rochester. Srinivas from India. Philippos from Athens. Amber from Gold Beach, Oregon. And Yevgenia from Finland. So we're thrilled to have all of you. I love our international crowd. And Susan, a great question came in from Vinka. She is curious. She wants to know, how do you figure out what you can give people when they seem so much more serious or experienced than you? I mean, we've all heard, lead with value or be helpful. But if somebody seems like, oh my gosh, they have so much more experience, they know so many more people, they have so much more money or power or whatever, what could I ever do for such a person? What would your take be,
Or
Susan?
they're so much taller than you. That happens to me every day because my license says I'm 5 foot, so I will just leave it. But on Zoom, I'm 6 feet. Um, that's a great question, Binga. And in the book, I talk about this notion of finding what your superpowers are. And I mentioned earlier about this notion of leading with how we can be helpful. Well, we can only be helpful when we can figure out how we can be helpful. And when you are meeting with someone who you perceive to have more power or more experience than you, it is all the more important to walk into that meeting or that introduction knowing what your superpowers are. And no matter who you are, whether you are just approaching secondary school or college, or you're approaching retirement, you have superpowers and they're going to ebb and flow. And sometimes somebody will say to me, well, Susan, you have all this experience. What? And I'll say 2 words: TikTok. I, for the life of me, can't figure out TikTok. So if somebody comes up to me and says, Susan, I will help you, guess what? None of the power dynamics even matter. So I don't mean to be so flippant about it, but the point is think every day, every week, what are your superpowers? They're going to change, they're going to ebb, they're going to flow, but you all have them.
That's fantastic. Such a good observation, and it's really true. What I've found is that if you are essentially trying to compare apples with apples, if you're trying to connect with someone, and let's say you're a beginning speaker, and someone is a super experienced, super expensive speaker, well, you're never gonna feel like you can add value to them. But you might be able to help them with weightlifting strategies that they don't know anything about.
A foreign language, coding. The other thing to do is we have a beautiful gift today, and that is we can almost find out all sorts of things about someone before we go in and meet with them. Do the 5 minutes of research. Check out their feed on Twitter or their career trajectory on LinkedIn. You can find out if they have grandchildren on Instagram. Do a little bit of research to find what I call the commonalities in the uncommonality, so that when you do go in, the power dynamics are even, okay? Because you have an idea of what's important to this person so that you can be focusing on how you can be helpful.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I love that. We're here with Susan McPherson. Her book is The Lost Art of Connecting, and you can check it out at thelostartofconnecting.com. We also want to say hi to our wonderful friends tuning in, our new friends joining us. We have Arash joining from Iran. We have our frequent guest, Nathaniel from Austin. Hi, Nathaniel. We've got Brandy from Spokane. Sushma's joining from India. Our recognized expert friend Kuzehan is here from DC. Spencer is joining us. We've got Meta. We've got new recognized expert friend Catherine from Durham. We've got Elen joining us again. Annette is joining from Southern California. Judy is here. Almas from Pakistan. Jason from DC. Judy is from Maryland. And let's see, we've got Roshini from Singapore. We're so glad to have all of you.
I want to fly and meet all of you in person.
That's right. Well, Susan's going to make connections now. That's it.
I'm like, oh.
Oh, that's great. Susan, a question came in from a LinkedIn user, and they're curious about this. Let's say you genuinely want to connect with someone, you want to build a real relationship, but maybe that person is kind of skeptical because they've been burned in the past. They think you have an agenda, even if you don't have one. What would you do in that circumstance?
I mean, there's always going to be people like that. Okay. We there's 10 billion people on this planet. There's nothing we can do. The most important thing is to lead by example. I often ask groups when I'm doing talks, how many of you receive a LinkedIn request from somebody, you hit the accept, and then in an hour they're selling you something? I would imagine if I could see everybody's shows of hands, people would be raising their hands right now. My suggestion is when you connect with somebody on LinkedIn, instead of then immediately trying to market them something that you do for a living or something on the side, instead think of ways you can be helpful to that person. Okay. And if you do it over time, it does become second nature. I'm not suggesting that every room you walk into, LinkedIn or a real room, that you're like, hi, how can I help? How can I help? But do the research and listen for clues of ways. Maybe it's an introduction you can make for that person. Maybe it's a newsletter that they should subscribe to. Maybe you can tell them about Dorie Clark's amazing Newsweek program, right? I mean, the thing is, these are ways we can be helpful when sometimes we don't realize just how helpful we can be and how minimum time commitment that they take.
Yes, I love that. This is fantastic advice. Thank you. We're here with Susan McPherson, author of the book, The Lost Art of Connecting. And this is Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better. I'm Dorie Clark, and we're really excited to have all of you here. We want to say hi to Ait Ben-Hassou, who is joining us from France. We have Anastasia from Greece. Ellie is joining us from London. We have Nuno from Portugal. Nilesh from India. Troy is coming here from Maine. We have Beth from Leesburg, Virginia. Dominic is joining from Nigeria. And Laura is joining us. We have Milka from Lima, Peru, and Lauren from Kansas City, Missouri. So many wonderful folks. Thank you for being here and for sharing your great questions with Susan McPherson. So a question came through, Susan, probably expressing what a lot of us feel these days, from Anna from New Hampshire. And she wants to know, if, let's say, you want to connect with someone, but you've just been feeling burned out. We've had this pandemic situation. We're all kind of run down. What can we do if we're feeling a little less than motivated in building connections?
Well, first and foremost, I feel you, Anna. I was supposed to go to a wonderful event the other night, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get off my couch. So we all are there. We feel it. The one benefit is you're not alone, right? And the second is give yourself some grace. We have just experienced something that none of us in previous lives or previous times have ever experienced. So it's going to take a while. And I suggest set some boundaries and set some goals. So instead of maybe connecting, with a new person every other day, you do it once a week. But set goals, and don't beat yourself up when they don't. This isn't life or death. And the goal is this should be something in your life that is uplifting. So it may be time to take a little bit of a break. But remember the long term. This is not like slam, bam, thank you, ma'am, today, tomorrow. This is over the long haul. So if you're feeling burnt out for a little bit, that's okay. It'll still be here tomorrow.
Yeah, Susan, such a great point, and thank you for responding to that. Again, we're here with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better, and author Susan McPherson. And Susan, a question came in from our viewer, Renee. And Renee has probably a common situation that many of us have faced, which is you're trying to connect with someone, you're trying to build a relationship with them, but you're not getting any response. They're just not having it. People are busy. So in some cases it pays to be persistent, but we don't want to be a pest. So when should we stop? When should we stop trying to build a connection if someone is not being immediately responsive?
The old ghosting. Believe me, it has happened to me in multitude parts of my life, dating, professional. So you're not alone also, Renee. And thank you for raising that question. Everybody has a different limit, but I am a big believer in being as direct as possible, which can be scary because it does give somebody the information so that then they can make the decision. But sometimes it's a better way to go because you can cut to the chase. And if somebody isn't being responsive, it's fair to call them out and state, Dorie, you haven't responded. I get how busy you are, but here is the specific question I'm hoping to get answered. Or here are 3 separate things that maybe you can be helpful with, and give somebody choices, right? If then after a couple of times they don't, it's time to move on. Like I said, there's 10 billion people, and as challenging and awful as it feels to be ghosted like that, it doesn't pay to keep trying, right? But be direct. There's nothing wrong with giving someone enough information so that then they can make the decision, and let them know how important this is to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. Susan McPherson, you can learn more about her and her business, McPherson Strategies, at mcpstrategies.com. And she is, of course, the author of the book, The Lost Art of Connecting. We want to say hi to some of the great friends tuning in. Eddie is joining us again from the Netherlands. Hi, Eddie. We have Heidi from Greeley, Colorado. Lori's joining us from Menlo Park. We have Mildred from Puerto Rico. Maureen is tuning in from the Jersey Shore. We've got a LinkedIn user from the UK. We have Steve from Cleveland. Kevin is from Boone. I think that's probably Boone, North Carolina. Hey. And we we have Sarah from Kansas City, who is a first-time viewer. We're really glad to have all of you guys here, and we love your great questions. A LinkedIn user, Susan, is asking the question, what are some effective ways that you've developed your emotional IQ? We know obviously this is an important component of building connections and relationships. The person wants to know what mentors or leaders have been most influential to you.
Sure, that's great. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, my late mom was an amazing mentor. She unfortunately was killed in a tragedy when I was 21. So I have only, so many years that I can remember, but I keenly remember her ability to connect. And I have to say, like, she used at the time in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the rotary telephone and the manual typewriter, and was successful doing that. So over the years, I have mirrored what she had done with that kind of crazy, archaic technology to use social media in a way that's uplifting and positive, to use email and WhatsApp in the same way. I also, my first boss when I was working in sales, one of my earlier careers in my 20s was selling of a newswire service. And my boss, her name, no joke, was Nancy Sells. But Nancy is the epitome of teaching how to sell in a way that you think about the other person and you don't sell to them. You find out what that person's hopes and dreams and wants are. And then you magically show up with them in some shape, way, or form. So I still, to this day, from 1991, can hear her saying, ask the questions and then use both your ears and one mouth, because we should be listening twice as much. So those are two people who have mentored or in my brain and probably come to me in my dreams. And Nancy's still very much alive. So
that's right. That is a very good thing. Thank you for sharing that, Susan. I love that. If you're enjoying this conversation about the lost art of connecting and how we can build more meaningful relationships, hit the like and share button so that your friends on your social channels can benefit from it as well. We're here with author Susan McPherson. And Susan, tying in, I know you were just alluding to it, and a big theme in your book is the importance of listening as a key component to building effective relationships. Jen has a question related to that. She says, I'd love your thoughts on curiosity. I find a lot of junior leaders struggle with asking curious questions. So if you want to get better at listening and about asking good questions, being a genuinely curious person, what would you suggest, Susan?
Jen, curiosity is such an incredibly valuable skill. And thankfully, my late father was a history professor at a women's college for 40 years. And I don't think you could grow up in my house without having curiosity as part of your blood, given who he was. But I do understand we have to inspire people to be curious. And for me, this notion of we don't know what we don't know is what enables me and powers me. But I do know having anything but the weather talk questions are great to have in your back pocket. And I say that because how many of us start Zoom chats, Microsoft Team meetings, conference calls, and guess what? Everyone talks about the weather. And nothing happens. You're not sharing anything about yourself. The person talking, you may find out what the weather is in Cleveland, but unless you live in Cleveland, who really cares, right? Sorry, no diss on Cleveland. But to me,
that's right, Steve. Don't be offended. We're glad you're here.
I'm so sorry. I always pick the one city that 5 people are from. But the notion of helping people have questions in their back pockets that are provocative without being overly nosy. So things like, at the end of this pandemic, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go and why? Or what was your favorite food as a child? If you could solve one problem in the next 6 months and money wasn't an issue, what problem would that be and why? Now, I'm just, tossing these out. And if you do end up reading the book, there's an entire chapter that gives you questions to carry, just saying. But these types of questions are not going to make, for the most part, wouldn't make people feel uncomfortable, but gives you a sense of who they are, gives you a sense of their hopes and dreams and desires.
Those are really beautiful questions, really insightful, Susan. Thank you for sharing that. We want to say hi to some great friends who are tuning in and joining us. Marion is joining us from just outside Atlanta. We have Andrea from Bogota. We've got Todd joining us, former better guest, Todd Churches, joining us from New York City. We have Cynthia from Chicago. We've got Irina joining us from Charlotte. We have Oluwadamilola, who is here for the first time, and we're so glad to have you here as well. So thank you, everybody. Gabriel is here from Mexico, and Catherine has a question, Susan, that I think probably a lot of us have faced. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. She says, on the other side of the request, if you want to make connections, if you want to really build relationships, that's great. But if strangers are reaching out saying they want to pick your brain, what do? You're a busy person. How do you triage these requests and not be a jerk, build relationships, but also recognize like, hey, we're all pretty busy here. How do you think about that?
Well, Catherine, first of all, yes, I get those questions quite often, and there are times I can't answer them. And obviously, I'm not walking the talk here. But what I do try to do is back to what I was saying earlier is ask, flip the switch and ask the person specifically what that he, she, or they are trying to acquire, because it may mean you don't have to have a meeting. It might mean you can just answer in a quick email, right? So sometimes I like to flip the switch and say, okay, yes, I'm extraordinarily busy, but if there's something very specific you need help with, I can. The other thing is last year I had several health issues and I couldn't be Susan, helpful Susan. And what I started to do was put in and I know I'm going to sound neurotic here, but it's just one way to manage this. I put in my calendar to get back to the people that I couldn't get back. So, August 10th, I woke up and I saw 9 a.m. go back to Lucy at da-da-da-da-da. Now, again, if you didn't already think I was crazy, now you do. But it was making semblance of normalcy out of chaos, but also, living the lost art of connecting, right? How awful it would be if people reached out and I was like, nah, I'm just going to talk about it, but I'm not going to live it. But also knowing that no one has unlimited capacity to help everyone, okay? But sometimes if you're ready to say no, you may be missing out on a tremendous opportunity. So I try to suggest that everybody get rid of their preconceived notions by looking at somebody and thinking, that person doesn't have a powerful position, or that person, isn't on a board. But you never know what you don't know.
That's right. So important. Susan McPherson, author of The Lost Art of Connecting. We have Gail joining from Miami. Thank you, Gail. And we have a question coming in also from Florida. We've got Gina in Clearwater. And she says, Susan, you are warm and fuzzy, a natural connector. I think you have a fan here. Gina says, you seem really nice. And I love the question here. What encouragement would you offer to those who are not as warm and fuzzy and immediately likable? What do you think about that?
I can tell you many people who don't like me and don't find me warm and fuzzy. So I think it all really depends, and maybe you're just catching me on a good day. But my suggestion is back to that. Think how you can be helpful, right? Do a little research before you're connecting or reconnecting, right? I mean, we have plenty of people in our communities, in our circles that we've lost touch with. So my suggestion is the best way to show up is learn something a little bit about that person so that when you speak to them or reach out to them, you can remind them about it. One of the greatest gifts we can give one another, whether we know them well or not, is to let them know we know something that they have accomplished, that they have completed, whether they won an award or they were recognized, and lead with that. And believe me, I have a feeling you're probably warm and fuzzy too.
Such good advice. Thank you, Susan. So picking up on a quick strand from one of your sample questions that you offered us, Susan, Annette in Southern California says she's curious now. Inquiring minds want to know, where do you want to travel post-pandemic and why?
Oh, everywhere but my living room. Now, I just booked a trip, believe it or not, to Greenland in September to learn more about what's happening to our climate, or what our climate is doing to the continent of Greenland. So I don't know if that was the top of my list, but it was kind of like, you know what, I'm not getting any younger, and Greenland may not be in the same situation in 10 years. So that's where I'm going. I did go, this is crazy, but I went to Antarctica in January of 2020. So that was my last trip pre-pandemic. So it seems fitting that Greenland would be my first trip after the pandemic.
You were going on the climate change tour, Susan. Props to you. Yeah.
climate change tour.
That's so great. I love it. What a good choice. So we're getting to the end of our
No,
segment here.
this
We
is
probably
so
have time
fun.
for one more question,
No.
one more last question here. Don't worry, everyone. We'll be back next week. And remember, if you want to make sure you never miss one of our better shows, it's 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays, the Newsweek Better Show. If you go to dorieclark.com, you can download a free self-assessment and sign up for my email list, and you'll get reminders. But the last question, Susan, Brandy wants to know, she said, you shared your idea of connecting with 3 to 5 people a day. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit more, like, what are the mechanics? How do you do this for people who are inspired? They say, okay, I'm with you, Susan. I want to do it. What does it actually look like to reach out and make those connections?
Well, I have to say, it isn't like I don't have a spreadsheet. And I also want to just, suggest it can be 1 to 2, it can be 2 to 4. You do not have to do 3 to 5. And it can be once a week, right? I want to set like realistic expectations. To me, anybody ever like taking a walk and somebody pops in their brain? Does that ever happen to people? Right? And guess what we do? We say, you know what? I'm going to get back to that person later. What I do is the 3 people who come to my mind, I reach out to right then and there. I'm going to say pussyfoot, if that's even still a terminology. I'm aging myself, but I don't like diss around. I'm just going to do it. And I don't do it with the expectation of a response. I do it just to say, Dorie, you popped in my brain. I'm thinking of you and sending a little bit of light your way. That's it. I wish there was a much more complicated, but it's my way of getting some dopamine in my body before I have my coffee.
I love it. Well, I think actually the simplicity and the organic nature of it makes it attainable for people. I think sometimes people expect to say, "Oh, I have the world's most massive Salesforce database," and I think it's actually reassuring that that it's a much more organic process. So she's walking the talk here, everyone. It's Susan McPherson. She is the author of the book, The Lost Art of Connecting. If you want to learn more or pick up a copy, go to thelostartofconnecting.com. Thank you all for tuning in. And Susan McPherson, thank you for being our guest.
Oh my God, I don't want to leave. Can I stay? This is so fun.
I know, we're going to totally have to have you back. This is fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to your amazing audience. What incredibly inspiring people.
I feel the same. Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.